Hello, creative ones, and welcome to Gel Printing Fundamentals. I'm Michelle Brown with Mixed Media Art. I'm so excited that you've joined us on this video series as we explore a series of short videos of all the things you need to get started with gel printing. Now, today we're going to look at adding layers to our gel prints, and there really is three main ways to do that. There's using the gel plate as like a big ink pad, a big stamp pad to add layers on. There's actually building up layers on the gel plate. And then there's a few kind of off the page, but perhaps more traditional methods. So let's jump in. So it's always exciting to be doing gel prints and then seeing what we can do to add layers, because when we do mixed media, adding layers is all about what we're trying to do to create interesting prints. So I said the three main ways. The first way is using your gel plate as a stamp pad. So if you remember when we talked about stamping, using the gel plate to then transfer the stamps on, whether they're something like an art foamy, whether it's something like a handmade stamp, whether it was some of our non-slip matte, and that's got a bit of shimmer in it, so that gives a nice little additional layer. Or even if we're doing something like using the bubble wrap and transferring that across as well. So that's a really easy way of adding layers, and it's quite controllable. But again, we want to make sure that the paint that we're putting on the top is a lot more opaque, so not as see-through. If we use something that was too transparent, then sometimes that will disappear into the background. So again, experiment with your paints, see what works better on the background layer as opposed to the layer in front. Our next method, like we said, is actually building those layers up on the plate. So using it to create the ghost prints. Now, the thing to remember as we experiment and play is that you're working in reverse. So the layer that will be on top of your paper is actually the one that's down the bottom of the plate, and then we're pulling it up. And again, your transparencies or your opacity of your paints are really important, because if you want to add different layers that you can see through, then you need to consider having the translucent ones closer to the plate and then the more solid ones further up. So there's lots of different ways you can play with that. And then some of the more traditional ways, straight mark making. So here's a piece of deli paper that I had a background on, and I've used a fine paintbrush to create some marks, to create an interesting sheet for some collage. And then ages ago, we were really looking at ways of adding layers to our gel print. So we came up with a class and we created these 4 little ATCs. So our first one was to use our hot foil. So this is using a transfer gel through a stencil and then adding the foil through there. We need to make sure our background layers are actually quite thin when we do that, so it doesn't actually stick onto it, but that works really well. So we can add layers with foils. We can use good old embossing powders, so using a ink pad that the glossing powder then sticks to, using a heat gun, and then we can add some little embellishments there. So another great way of adding layers with embossing powders. We can use our stamps. So just as we would stamp on any other surface, again, we want to make sure that we don't have too much texture there and it's definitely dry before we stamp over it. Here we've used our Ranger ink so that it doesn't run, and then coloured that in a little bit as well. So again, our stamps get a whole second lease of life. And then finally, and of course we'll talk about a little bit this when we talk about what we do with all of our prints, is just using it for collage. So cutting out circles, doing our stamping and cutting it out, whether that's die cutting or using punches, and then building up those layers. So there's lots of ways that we can create layers on our gel prints. We can use them as a stamp pad. We can build up those layers, and there's lots of different methods that we can use. We can do mark making with markers, with paint markers, or with paint. And then we can do our traditional paper crafting, so foiling, embossing, stamping, and then collage. So I hope that's given you some ideas of ways that you can add layers to your gel prints. So there's the more, using your gel plate as a stamping pad to get the paint across. There's actually building those layers up on the gel plate, and there you really do want to know your paints to know which layers you put them in. Again, considering that we're working from that front surface back up as we add our layers. And then mindful, if we use a really opaque paint or one that's not see-through, then we are going to block out those subsequent layers. So really practicing using masks and different paints to build up those layers. And then finally, there's all of our traditional ways. We've got foils, we've got embossing powders, we've got our stamps, and then we've got all the other tools that we use to create layers on top of our gel prints as well. So I hope this has certainly given you some ideas of ways that we can create layers with our gel prints. Please leave your questions and comments below. Of course, like, thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and I look forward to bringing you more gel printing fundamentals soon. And of course, for more details and for our classes, head over to mixedmediaart.net, where you will see all the things we've got coming up. So this is Michelle signing off. I hope you have a crafty day.